All right, welcome back, everybody. Stop number 3 on the Bassmaster Elite Series was out on the Pasquotank River in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. So there's a lot to unpack with this one. We had never been there before. The Pasquotank is actually a tributary or a river that dumps into what's called the Albemarle Sound. And then on the outside of the sound is called the Outer Banks. And then you have the Atlantic Ocean. So gigantic place, ocean, Outer Banks, the sound, and then you have all these river systems that dump into the sound, and the Pasquotank happened to be one of them. That's where we launched out of for the tournament. But we could go to several other ones, whether it was the Chowan, the Roanoke, the Alligator, the Prequimans. There was, the North River. There was tons of options for us, and that really played a key role in a lot of guys' strategy throughout the week. It's really hard to wrap your head around how big this place was. I tried my best to do that in pre-practice at home, just studying maps, constantly measuring distances, trying to get an idea of, where could I run to efficiently to find a population of fish and then get back on time and give myself the best shot to have a high finish in this tournament. And ultimately, I tried to stretch my legs a little bit into the sound, but I wasn't making a gigantic run. My run was 25-30 miles there and then 25-30 miles back, so it wasn't like some of these guys where they're making a 60-mile run one way. And for me, the reason I did that is I felt like I wanted to maximize my fishing time, and in my eyes it was a little less risky, which for this tournament, with the unknown of how nasty that sound can get from a wave perspective, being able to get on the fish that you found in practice, catch them, and get back was just a bit of an unknown. I didn't know how much these fish moved around day to day. At certain places like the St. Lawrence River, when we run out to the lake or close to the lake and fish smallmouth, a lot of times we can relocate those fish in that 4 to 5 hour period. The fishery is so good that oftentimes you can catch them and get back and have good bags. This place, I had no idea. I've heard of giant bags here, 25 to 30 pound bags, and we certainly saw some of that, but it's also one of those places that I think can get a little stingy if you're not around them too. It's a river, when you get around these fish, oftentimes they will bite, but being around them on a gigantic place like this isn't always the easiest thing to do. So my strategy was to try and stay relatively close, maximize my fishing time, and try and find an area that maybe wasn't getting as much pressure. I was fortunate enough to find an area like that. I don't think it was a top 10 area necessarily, but I felt like it was a place where I could go and get a base limit, and then I could run some other stuff, working my way back to take off to try and upgrade throughout the day. So we'll jump into it. We'll stop here and there. There's a bunch of strategy involved in this tournament. I really enjoyed it. It's a river system. I love fishing rivers. And it was right around the spawn too. So anytime we get around the spawn on a river system, my go-to is, if there's hard wood cover available, I love to flip wood around the spawn. I know those fish are up there. They're either pre-spawn staging or they're actually spawning. I'm not visually looking at them, but that was my primary deal in this tournament. And we'll kind of break it down, but every day I was pretty much flipping wood cover. I was whining a little bit here and there, but here we go, getting started. Day one. Didn't have a marshal this day, so I was on my own. Get to run out of the mouth of here of the Pasquotank, and we kind of get into my little backwater stretch. And what I found in practice was some of this offshore wood that was only in 2 to 3 foot of water, but it was off the bank, and I was using forward facing to locate that brush. There you can see a swirl. That fish followed me out of that brush in this first pile here. So put the poles down. I was throwing a 1/2 ounce jig right now, just black and blue. And I reel up to make another cast, and I see a fish follow my bait here. Get a decent one in the boat, 2.5 pounder. And that was kind of the quality I was finding in this area. The biggest one I caught in this stretch was 2 3/4 in practice. Here's another one on the jig about 5 minutes later on a little offshore piece of brush or an old laydown. But those 2 to 2 3/4 were quality fish in this tournament. The weights at the top were obviously pretty big, but anything over 2 pounds for a base limit was good here. Here's another one, came on a little offshore tree there. You can see it. That one was actually on a cleanup craw in the Crush City line. And that became kind of my primary deal, the 1/2 ounce jig and then the cleanup craw. And here's another one in another offshore laydown, kind of pretty bad boat flip there. One thing I noticed throughout watching some of this film is some of my boat flips with these fish were not super impressive. Something I maybe need to work on a little bit here, but that's kind of common for this short line, flipping deal. You got to kind of get out of position at times. There was a fish that nipped my bait, and that happened a lot this week, which is kind of a telltale sign of the spawn going on. When those fish are nipping at your bait, always be sure to throw back into that same area around the spawn. Here it happens again. This one was just set up on a little shallow stump. There was kind of a bunch of that in this area. You get that fish to bite again, and that was a quality bite. That was like a 2 3/4 on the jig. End up moving to another little pocket in this same area. Flipping the cleanup craw. This is just a 7-foot medium heavy fast Avid rod from St. Croix. I really like that rod for flipping a small Texas rig around the spawn when I'm not fishing heavy cover, just kind of on the edges of that wood cover. That was a small little upgrade there. So we left this area with like 11-12 pounds, which I was really happy with. Work our way out into the sound here, get to ride a few waves, and kind of start working my way back to the Pasquotank and dip into a few areas on my way back, just trying to upgrade in the afternoon, and just flipping the cleanup craw down this stretch. Got good sun on it, nice and calm. Another pretty kind of bad landing there, but that actually ended up being a 3-pounder, so that was a huge upgrade. Bump over to another little canal here, and I got way in the back of this little stretch, put down the swim jig there and pick up the cleanup craw, so we get fortunate and get a nice quality bite here. It's like end up being like a 3.4. There's some other guys in that area, so I was kind of trying to keep that fish down and not be making too much commotion. Now here I'm going to pause it, and we got a tree coming up here in front of us, and this might have been one of the better decisions I've made throughout the week in terms of getting close enough to the cover before you flip. And there's another scenario on day 2 where I'll walk through it, and this is all mechanics thing, guys. Like when you're flipping heavy cover, boat positioning and body positioning and how you set up as you approach that cover is a big deal towards getting a good hook set and potentially landing that fish. As I approach this tree here, we'll play it again. You can see right here, I make a cast and I was like, nope, I'm too far away. I need to get just a couple feet closer. Make sure we don't got too much line out when we throw into that thing. And sure enough, we get our biggest bite of the day and get a good hook set on that fish. And here I end up making another decision. I was about to bolt flip that thing right there, and I decided not to. I kind of learned my lesson in Florida. Yes! And we ended up getting this fish in the boat.
Yes, baby. Freaking dog. Yes! Heck yeah. Oh, dinner kicker, baby.
This fish ends up being 4.9, so almost a 5 pounder. And I was super happy with my decision to, slide up a little closer to that tree before I pitched into it. A lot of times when you're flipping and pitching, if you're too far away and try and set the hook, there's a nice call there, you can oftentimes mess up the whole deal. You try and set the hook, you got too much line out, you don't get a good hook into them. So I was happy with that. And that's a big deal when you're flipping cover. So that was the end of day one. Definitely exceeded my expectations. Get back, put the boat on the trailer, get them bagged up here, and off to weigh in we go. But after practice, I really felt like I had the possibility to catch like maybe 15 pounds or so. And, I ended up weighing 17 something. I'll have to look. It's like 17.3, I believe. So exceeded my expectations. I think we were sitting in 9th place after day one. So way higher than I would have expected. That was such an unknown going into this place. We had no idea what the weights were going to be. I didn't know if 17 pounds was going to be middle of the pack, sitting in the 20s or 30s, or top 10. Apparently it happened to be good enough for a top 10 on day one, which I was super happy about. But that was what made this tournament so interesting too. I didn't know if the guys were just going to absolutely blow it out and have big weights throughout the whole field, or if it was going to be kind of a grinder deal the further on you went down. And that's kind of what it ended up being. I think it took 11 and a half maybe a day to make the cut. So it's definitely a little lower than I thought it would be. So anyways, we'll go on to day two here. And I'm pretty much going to run the same program. I got enough bites in that starting area to feel like, hey, I feel like I can go back there and at least get a base limit to make the cut. All I needed really was about a small limit to make the cut. So I felt like I would start there and hunker in. And I literally went down the same stretches. I expanded just a little bit on day two. But start with a jig here right off the bat. Literally the same trees and stumps that I fished on day one, and they reloaded. They weren't as big.
1 pound, 4 ounce.
We had a lot of fish in that 1.25 pound to 2 pound range, but it was nice to get some bites right off the bat and kind of get things rolling for the day. So 2 in the box pretty quick. Moving down the same stretch here with the cleanup craw. Just about break my rod there.
Keeper. I'd say 1 pound 4 again.
That was kind of a cool bite. I was hung up there, popped it off that stump, and that one ate it right away. I got back up there, I threw it the same stump. And catch another one. It wasn't a real big one, but there was 2 sitting on there, which that's another little tip during the spawn. If you guys are flipping around the spawn and you catch one, always be sure to throw back into that same area.
I'd say 1.5 pounds.
Here we put another cleanup craw on, and we went through a pile of those this week. So here's an example of not a way to fish a laydown. We cast once, twice, 3 times.
Break off. Ooh.
So real quick, what did I learn from that? I fished it, you know, that was the first time I'd fished it that day at all, and I hadn't fished the day before. I flipped to it 3 times thinking, okay, I've covered it enough. I flipped to it, I think that was my 3rd or 4th time. And as you could see, the boat was kind of drifting away from it. I had kind of given up on that cast. I had made the cast and I was drifting it away. My mind had already drifted away into the next little zone that I was going to go fish. And that was a quality fish. That was like a 3-pound bite. And the fish, here's the laydown. The fish was here. It bit, went under the laydown, and just sawed me right off, which there's not much you can really do about that. There were a ton of barnacles on this place. I broke off, I think, 3 times that week. A lot of it was, all of them were barnacle related. There's just barnacles all over this wood. But if I would have been a little bit more in tune and thorough in terms of making sure my boat was sitting in the right spot, you know, don't pull it away like you're going to the next area, you know, hone in on that, kind of like we did on day 1 where I got right in close, tight. That's what I'm talking about in terms of boat positioning and angles when you're flipping. It's so important to be methodical with every flip and pay attention to every flip from an angle and a boat positioning standpoint, because you can really get yourself out of position when you're flipping like that. If I would have nosed in there more, you know, stayed steady with the boat, made my flips, and then moved on, I feel like I would have had a better chance of landing that fish. Instead, I flipped it 3 times, flipped it for the 4th time. I'm turning away. That fish eats. It's got me going. It goes the opposite way of where the boat's going and saws me right off. So not saying it wouldn't have gone under that tree anyways, but if I wasn't pulling away from it at the time, I just feel like I would have had a better chance to land that fish. So anyways, not to continue to harp on it, but pay attention to your angles and boat positioning when you're flipping like this up shallow. Here I'm kind of realizing, hey, that was dumb. I should have finished out that cast before I'm moving on. That fish happened to be up pretty shallow. A lot of these fish in these pockets, they were shallow, but they're on the outer bends. So where it was maybe 1 foot on one side, it was 2 to 3 feet on the other. Here's a decent little 2.5. That one happened to be in the deepest little ditch there, way in the back of this pocket. You can see I'm kind of on the outside bend on that right side. And this area I was in was relatively flat. And so finding it, even if it was just a foot deeper zone, was a big deal when I was flipping this shallow cover. Something nipped me right there. Really bad boat flip again.
You had him hooked good, but still.
They had him hooked good, but that was a pretty brutal boat flip. That filled out about an 11-pound, 12-pound limit for the day. So now I'm about to get back out onto the main lake here, and it's calm back in this pocket, but we're about to kind of experience what the sound is all about here.
Might be a little bumpy out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I run out to the mouth here. The wind's just absolutely ripping right into the mouth of this steel. So a few boat driving tips for you guys as long as we're kind of watching this. So right now I'm driving the troughs of these waves. And that point kind of way out in the distance is kind of what I got to get around. If I ride the troughs the whole way, I'm not going to get to that point. So I'm kind of tacking back and forth. So I go out into the sea a bit, take it easy, you know, I'm going 10 to 15 mile an hour, so I'm not spearing waves. And then every so often I can turn left and run those troughs. So if you guys get in a situation where you've got to navigate big seas like this, you know, just don't get in a hurry, take your time, trim the motor all the way down, and just ease your way through it. You know, I'm not going any more than 20 mile an hour into these big waves, and then when you can turn and go in those troughs, then you can run, you know, 30, maybe 40. But you see, we're kind of just running the troughs, and the troughs aren't super huge on the Sound, but they were big enough where you could run them. And we finally get around that point back into the cove. So anyways, just a little tip, just don't get in a hurry.
I just became the biggest Bob Downey fan in the world. Holy cow. You don't know how much I appreciate how you did that. 'Cause I've been in the boat with some idiots before.
And your marshal or co-angler or buddy will appreciate you for it too. Also, a little hot tip, if you want to ever get a bite, just eat a sandwich, and usually one will pick up your bait. I guess I was going to eat that sandwich no matter what.
You could say like pound 7 ounces or something like that.
So this happened to be the area where I caught those two big ones late in the day on day one. I didn't start there because I didn't get a vibe that there are a lot of big quality ones there, but I felt like I could maybe get another big bite or two, so we went back in there at this point in the day. And it's just a bunch of small fish. So I ended up getting out of there. I'm happy about not starting in there because it could have been a bad deal. There were not many keepers to be had there on day two. So I run into one little canal here at the end of the day on the way back. Just flipping the cleanup craw again. And then end up getting, that was like a 240, I believe. Got rid of one of our 1 3/4 pounds. And that was our day two. We ended up with, I believe, right around 12 pounds or so, and fell down into the mid-20s.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was fun.
Great meeting you.
Yeah, you too. We'll maybe see you down the road.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And that was it. We ended up making the cut, which is always a good deal. Whenever you can make a weekend cut, you got to be happy about that. And still sitting decent enough in the points, decent enough in the standings where I could make a run at a top 10 with a big bag. I really wrestled with what to do on day three. I knew I had an area where I could get a limit. Otherwise, it was going to be a bit of a gamble. And day three is one of those times in a tournament where you can really make up some points, but you can also lose a lot of points too. And throughout the course of a season, that can really make a big difference. So I wanted to make sure that I secured a limit to make sure I maintained some of my points. So my decision was to go back down to that same area where I had caught a base limit each day, and then try and run around and get some upgrades the rest of the day. And there were some bites to be had, but as you're gonna see here, I had to stick around in this area a lot longer than I was hoping to put a limit in the boat. Get a bite right away, right off the bat on a jig, and that's our first mishap of the morning. Doesn't come in the boat. Switch over to the cleanup craw here. That one must have just had the back end of the bait, which is real common during the spawn. They pick that bait up by the back claws, oftentimes move it off their bed, and they don't really fully have it. I think that's what happened there. Fishing down the same stretches that I fished the first couple days.
So, I don't know, they're either just sitting on this stuff or they are. Seems to be like they're just spawning. But like this one, I think I caught 2 off of it yesterday, so I don't know if they're just.
That one got me down in the root system and sawed me right off on the barnacles. And is about a 2.5 pounder, and jumped just to let us know that, hey, yeah, I did take your bait. There's our 4th bite of the day, set right into the stump. So by this time we're really just we're really struggling. Down the same stretches, we're getting the bites we need to put a limit on the boat. There's bite number 5.
We got a really famous bear hunt.
And it comes off.
Do ya?
Black bear, yeah.
When I was over in the North River, I saw some.
6, and we break off on barnacles again. By this time, we are really not having a good start to our day. We're kind of getting owned by these fish, honestly, and it's thankfully happening on day 3 and not day 1 or day 2. But fishing down the same stretches, getting plenty of bites. For some reason, they're not coming in the boat. Finally, we switch over to a swim jig here just to kind of get out of that flipping mode for a bit. I was just like, I need to do something else. For whatever reason, I'm not putting these fish in the boat. So just covering a shallow stretch here on the way to another area, and finally do get a bite here on just a black and blue swim jig with the cleanup craw. Finally get that skunk out of the boat.
Gosh, it's so hard to see your line. Like that thing was sideways before I even. Suddenly just like, oh, there's nothing. Like pound 12 ounces.
Pound 12.
This is actually the same stretch I fished on day 2, kind of way up in the back of this pocket. End up getting my second keeper, slam it right into the graph there.
I think so.
I have killed one that way before.
Yeah, I mean, he hit pretty hard. Hopefully don't die in the line.
So nothing big, 1.5 pounds, but one thing we can learn here. So guys, this is on my way back out, the same stretch. I throw back in the same exact spot where I caught that fish.
Nice, bro. That's a good one.
That might be the female.
Right, came right back and caught in the same spot pretty much, right?
So always keep that in mind around the spawn. You catch one, whether you always got to throw back right away, but if you're in that area, be sure and revisit it and fish it again. So I do apologize here. We're now at the end of the day, just fishing a swim jig, flipping a little bit. I ended up losing the middle part of my day. My GoPro shut off randomly. I didn't know it. And we missed the middle part of the day of my fish catches. Honestly, you guys, it was pretty much the same as the first couple days. Just flipping that cleanup craw in a jig on hard cover again. We ended up calling up to, it was 11, 12 pounds, somewhere in that range. Nothing too special, but it was enough to kind of maintain our position. We ended up falling to 27th, so we lost 2 points.
See you around at some point when we come back.
But we didn't lose, 20 points. So that was a good deal. We didn't move up at all, but, happy with the tournament overall for sure. I got to fish my comfort level. I got to fish my strengths. Flipping wood on hardcover is one of my favorite things to do really all year round, but especially around the spawn. I feel like I understand it. I've done it a lot on the Mississippi River. We're not visually looking for these spawning fish. We're not visually sight fishing, but we're kind of picturing where they're going to set up. And the way they're eating the bait, nipping at it, you're swinging and missing them oftentimes is just kind of a telltale sign that they're spawning for sure. And then you're catching one there, you go back and you catch a female. So a couple takeaways from this tournament, for me, what I, just looking at the footage, what I can learn from it, I need to get a little bit more smooth with some of my boat flips. And that's part of just the way I was fishing, short line applications, heavy hook sets, fish that are running out of there hot. Oftentimes they get you in weird positions where your boat flip might be a little awkward, but that's something that I can work on for sure. Continuing to be mindful of the boat and my body position and angles when I'm flipping that cover. You almost got to think forward to, if I get a bite, how am I going to be able to set the hook and get that fish out of here and into the boat? And really be mindful on every flip. Don't give up on a cast like I did on day 2, and then you get a bite and things going the other way and breaks you off. So that's something to really be mindful of. You watch a guy like Greg Hackney, and he's a surgeon around that shallow cover. And those are the little things that I think can separate you guys from the next level or from your competitors, especially when it comes to this shallow water flipping, is just being so precise and tuned in to your boat positioning and your angles of your casts before you even make them, trying to predict what's going to happen if that bite occurs. So that's something I can always try and improve on. I feel like I do a decent job of it, but there's times where you get lazy, right? And it cost me on day 2. So, but overall, super happy with it. There was a lot of strategy involved in this tournament. I felt like I didn't totally take myself out of it. It wasn't a top 10 performance, but anytime you get a top 30 on the Elite Series against this crew, you got to be super happy. So I had a lot of fun there. I really hope we go back so we can explore a little bit more. But for now, we'll take that finish and we're on down the road to Hartwell next week. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll catch you at the next one.